The most famous monster in America wasn't a victim. He wasn't trapped. He wasn't even owned. The world believed he was a freak sold for $50. The truth, he used the cage to build a fortune, and later bought the man who thought he owned him. What was at stake? His freedom, his body. Even his corpse was legally contracted for display after death. Tonight I'll show you how a boy sold as a sideshow attraction rewrote the contract, faked his own death, built an empire under a new name, and forced his former master to kneel in a boardroom. So here's the question. How does a man who was legally owned become the one who owns the room? It was the 1820s, maybe 1823 or 24. It doesn't matter much. Time moved slower then. It moved like syrup pouring off a spoon in winter. The place was nowhere special, just a hollow in the ground, in the middle of farm country, where the soil was too rocky to grow much corn, but good enough to grow resentment. It was a gray place, gray sky, gray fences, gray people. In that gray house there lived a secret. He was a boy, just a boy. But his mother never called him by a Christian name when the neighbors were close. She called him Hush. That was his name for the first 10 years of his life. Hush, child. Get down, child. Stay away from the window, child. You see, he was born heavy. That's the only way I can say it. Nature had been too generous with the clay when she molded his face. The bone was thick, the skin was loose and folded, deep ridges like the bark of an old oak tree, twisting where a nose should be straight, sinking where a cheek should be smooth. It wasn't bleeding, it wasn't hurting him, it was just too much. To the village, too much was a sin. They didn't have words for medical conditions back then. They only had words for curses. His father was a man who looked at the ground a lot. He had big, rough hands, the kind that could pull a stump out of the earth, but he was afraid of his own son. He wasn't cruel with his fists. No, he was cruel with his silence. He would look at the boy, and then he would look away, like he had seen a ghost. He would sit at the table, chewing his bread, staring at the wall, wishing the problem would just vanish. So the boy vanished. He learned to be a shadow in his own home. He lived in the corner, behind the wood stove, where the shadows were deepest. He knew that if he stayed there, his mother wouldn't sigh that heavy, shaking sigh that sounded like a tire losing air. He knew that if he didn't make a sound, his father wouldn't grind his teeth. It was a small cage, a dark cage. But even in a cage, a mind grows. That's what people forget. You can lock up a body, you can cover a face, but you cannot stop a brain from eating the world if it's hungry. And this boy, he was starving. He didn't have school. A monster doesn't go to school to learn sums. A monster stays in the cellar. But his mother used to wrap eggs in old newspapers she got from the market, scraps of paper, torn pages from almanacs, bits of catalogs. When she threw them in the fire to start the morning warmth, he would pull them out. Imagine that. A boy of 7 or 8 sitting in the soot with half-burned edges of paper, trying to figure out why the black marks made his mother say sugar or flour or auction. He taught himself the letters by the shape of them. A was a ladder. B was a pair of spectacles. O was a mouth saying, oh. He matched the scraps to the sounds coming from the main room. He listened to his father read the Bible on Sundays, moving his finger over the thick pages. And then later, when the house was asleep, the boy would crawl out and touch the same pages. He felt the ink. He memorized the patterns. By the time he was 12, he knew more about the world than his father, and he had never stepped past the front gate. He knew that there were cities made of stone. He knew that men built ships that could cross the ocean without sails. He read about kings and wars on dirty pieces of paper that smelled like bacon grease. But knowledge is a heavy thing to carry when you have nowhere to go. One evening, I recall it was autumn, because he always said the wind howled like a wounded dog. There was a knock at the door. Not a neighbor's knock. Neighbors knocked quick and sharp. This was a heavy, confident knock. The wood of the door groaned. The boy did what he was trained to do. He scrambled. He went under the floorboards of the pantry, a shallow space they had dug out for potatoes. He lay there in the dark, smelling the damp earth and the dry rot of the onions. He breathed through his mouth so he wouldn't make a sound. He heard boots on the floor above him, heavy boots with metal heels, click, clack, click, clack. He heard a voice he didn't know. It wasn't a farmer's voice. It was smooth, rich, like butter melted in a pan. It was a voice that didn't apologize for taking up space. I've heard talk, the voice said. Townsfolk chatter. They say you have something in this house that doesn't belong. The boy's father mumbled something. We keep to ourselves. We don't bother no one. I'm not the sheriff, the smooth voice said, and I'm not the parson. I don't care about laws and I don't care about souls. I care about curiosities. I care about the things God makes when he's been drinking. There was a silence then, the kind of silence that feels loud. Is it true? The stranger asked. Is the boy singular? The mother started to cry, soft little noises. He's a good boy. He don't mean no harm. I didn't ask if he was good, madam, the voice said. Good is cheap. Good is boring. I asked if he was singular, different, magnificent. Under the floorboards, the boy's heart was hammering against the dirt. Magnificent? No one had ever used that word. They used unfortunate, burden, mistake. I can take the burden off you, the stranger said. And then the sound that changes everything. The heavy metallic clunk of coins hitting a wooden table. Not copper pennies, heavy coins, silver, maybe gold. Enough to fix the roof, the stranger said. Enough to buy a new plow. Enough to forget you ever had a son who couldn't go to church. The boy waited. He waited for his father to shout, to say, Get out of my house. That is my blood. He waited for his mother to scream, You cannot buy a child like a sack of grain. He waited, and the only thing he heard was his father's chair scrape against the floor as he leaned forward to look at the money. He eats a lot, the father whispered. It was a weak excuse, a cowardly negotiation. I have plenty of food, the stranger said. Bring him out. The trap door was lifted. The light hurt his eyes. The stranger was a tall man in a coat that looked like midnight, with a silk hat held in gloved hands. He didn't flinch when he saw the boy. He didn't recoil. He leaned in, lifted a lantern, and tilted his head. He looked at the boy's face, not like a person looks at a person, but like a carpenter looks at a piece of wood, checking the grain, estimating the profit. Stand up, the stranger said. The boy stood. He was tall for his age, broad-shouldered from carrying water buckets in the dark. Turn around, the boy turned. Marvelous, the stranger whispered. Absolute horror. They will scream, boy. They will absolutely scream. He turned to the father. Deal. The paper was signed. I have the contract here. It doesn't say adoption. It says Apprenticeship for the duration of natural vitality. That's a fancy way of saying ownership. The father signed with an X. The stranger signed with a flourish. Dr. Sylvanus Morlock, proprietor of the Morlock Traveling Museum of Wonders. The boy was told to pack his things. He didn't have things. He had the clothes on his back and a piece of slate he used to practice writing. He took the slate when he walked out the door. He didn't look back at his mother. He knew she was crying into her apron, but he also knew her hand was resting on the pile of coins. The trade had been made. His pain for their comfort. It was the first lesson he learned about the real world. Everything has a price. Dignity is just a word you use until someone offers you enough money to sell it. The carriage ride was long. He had never been in a carriage. The leather seats were cold. The stranger, Dr. Morlock, lit a cigar. The smell of tobacco filled the small box. "You are angry," Morlock said. He didn't look at the boy. He looked out the window at the passing trees. "I am sold," the boy said. His voice was deep, rough from lack of use. "You were drowning," Morlock corrected. "I pulled you into the boat. Do not mistake a rescue for a kidnapping, boy. Back there, you were a shame. With me, you are an asset. Do you know the difference?" "Money," the boy said. Morlock smiled, a thin, sharp smile. "Smart, aye. Like a monster with a brain? Yes, money, but also purpose. Out here, people will stare at you. They will hate you, but they will pay for the privilege, and you will take their money, and you will eat roast beef and drink wine, and you will laugh at them because they are paying to see a mirror." "A mirror?" "They pay to see you so they can feel normal," Morlock said. "They pay to see the chaos on your face so they can believe their little lives are orderly. You are the priest of their comfort, boy. Never forget that. You are not the victim, you are the service." They arrived at the camp 2 days later. It was night. The smell hits you first. Sawdust, horse manure, roasting peanuts, and cheap perfume. It was a city of canvas, tents flapping in the wind like giant white birds. The noise was deafening. Dogs barking, hammers striking iron, men shouting in languages the boy didn't know. He was shoved into a tent at the back. It was labeled assets. There were others. A woman with a beard as thick as a brush. A man who was no taller than a bucket. A pair of twins joined at the hip. They looked at him with tired eyes. They didn't gasp at his face. They just made room on the bench. "Fresh meat," the bearded lady said. She was stitching a sock. "Don't let Morlock starve you. He tries to save on oats. Ask for seconds." That was his welcome. No pity, just practical advice. The next day, the preparation began. And this is the part that still makes my blood cold when I think about it. You would think, wouldn't you, that a face like his, swollen, heavy, distorted, would be enough for a showman? You would think nature had done enough work. But the show business is not about truth. It is about the exaggeration of truth. Morlock came into the tent with a box of paints and putty. He sat the boy down in front of a mirror, a cracked piece of glass nailed to a crate. "It's good," Morlock said, touching the boy's cheek, "but it's too human. They see a beast. If they see a human, they might feel guilty. If they see a beast, they only feel fear. Fear opens purses, pity closes them." So he went to work. He darkened the shadows under the boy's eyes with charcoal until they looked like empty sockets. He used red paint to make the heavy folds of skin look inflamed, angry, raw. He glued coarse yak hair to the boy's neck to make him look more feral. He handed the boy a costume. It wasn't clothes. It was a burlap sack and jagged strips of leather covered in fake chains. A golden muzzle was placed in his hands. It was made of brass, shiny and cold. "Wear this," Morlock said. "Only take it off when the drum roll hits the crescendo. That is the reveal. That is the money shot." The boy looked at the muzzle. It was a dog's collar. It was a symbol of silence, of control. "I can read," the boy said quietly. "I can write. I know the capital of France is Paris." Morlock laughed. He laughed until he coughed. "Nobody pays a penny to see a monster do long division, my boy. Put on the muzzle." The boy stood there. He had a choice. He could refuse. He could run into the woods and starve. Or he could put on the gold. He looked in the mirror. He saw the charcoal, the paint, the yak hair. He didn't see himself anymore. He saw a character. He saw a shield. If they laughed at this thing in the mirror, they weren't laughing at him. They were laughing at the paint. They were laughing at Morlock's creation. He lifted the brass muzzle and strapped it to his face. The metal tasted like old pennies. That night, he heard the roar of the crowd for the first time. It sounded like the ocean during a storm. The tent was packed. The air was hot and thick with the smell of sweat and excitement. Morlock stood in the center ring, shouting through a megaphone, "Ladies and gentlemen, beware. Turn your eyes if you are faint of heart. We found him in the deepest caves of the Andes, half man, half granite, the architect of nightmares." The curtain was pulled back. The boy stumbled out. He had practiced the stumble. Morlock told him to drag his left leg, to act broken. He dragged it. The light hit him. It was blinding. 1,000 eyes fixed on him at once. There was a gasp. A collective intake of breath that sucked the air out of the tent. And then a scream from the front row. A woman hid her face in her husband's coat. A child started crying. The boy stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. "They hate me," he thought. "They want me dead." "Behold," Morlock shouted, "the beast!" And then the boy took off the muzzle. He let it drop to the floor with a loud clang. He looked up straight into the lights and let them see the full reality of his face. The silence broke. It shattered. Applause didn't come immediately. What came first was the sound of metal hitting wood. Clink, clink, clatter. Someone threw a coin into the ring, then another, then a handful. "For the beast!" Someone shouted, "Look at him! God save us!" Coins rained down, silver dollars, copper pennies, nickels. They bounced off the sawdust. One hit his boot, another hit his shoulder. He looked down at the money. It was glittering in the gaslight. In his old house, a coin like that would have fed the family for a week. Here, it was thrown like garbage. He felt something shift inside his chest. A lock turning. He realized Morlock was right. He wasn't a person to them. But people didn't throw silver at people. They threw silver at wonders. He bent down, slowly, clumsily, like the beast they wanted him to be, and picked up a coin. He held it up to the light and snarled. A fake snarl. A theatrical snarl. The crowd went wild. They loved it. They loved that he wanted their money. It made him real to them. He raked the money into piles. His hands were trembling. Not from fear anymore, but from adrenaline. He felt the weight of the silver. It was heavy. It was cold. It was real. Backstage, after the show, he sat in front of the crate with the mirror. He started to wipe the grease paint off his face. He peeled off the yak hair. He washed away the charcoal. Morlock came in grinning, carrying a sack of cash. He tossed a smaller bag to the boy. "Your share," Morlock said. "Minus room and board, minus the cost of the costume, minus the travel." It was still more money than the boy had ever held. "You did good," Morlock said, lighting a cigar. "You have the talent. You know how to make them look." The boy looked at his reflection. The paint was gone, but the face was the same. The heavy brow, the twisted nose, the swollen jaw. "I am not a beast," the boy whispered to the glass. "No," Morlock said, counting the takings. "You are a business." The boy touched the bag of coins. He squeezed it tight, hard enough to hurt his hand. "Business," the boy repeated. And in that moment, in the smell of grease paint and tobacco smoke, the boy died. He really did. The frightened child who hid under the floorboards vanished, and something else was born, something harder, something that looked at the world through a barrier of glass and decided, "If you want a monster, I will sell you a monster, but I will set the price." He stood up and put the money in his pocket. He didn't know it yet, but he had just started to build his wall, coin by coin, layer by layer, a wall so high that one day nobody would be able to see him at all. You might think that money is just metal. You might think it is just paper with pictures of dead presidents or kings. But let me tell you, when you have lived in the shadows your whole life, money feels like light. It feels like armor. He believed, truly believed, that if he stacked the gold coins high enough, they would build a wall that the stairs couldn't get over. He thought that if his coat was made of the finest silk, nobody would notice the skin underneath it was rough as a stone road. It was vanity. A young man's vanity. But who could blame him? For 20 years he had been garbage. Now every night 500 people screamed his name. Every night the jar filled up. He started to look at the world differently. He didn't want to hide in the wagon anymore. He wanted to walk down the main street. I remember the day he decided to buy the suit. It was in Boston, I think. Or maybe Philadelphia. One of those brick cities where the wind cuts through you off the water. He found the most expensive tailor in town. The sign on the door said Gentleman's Outfitter. It smelled of wool and cedar wood and old money. When he walked in, the little bell above the door rang. Ding, cheerful. The tailor was a small man with glasses perched on the end of his nose. He looked up smiling, ready to greet a gentleman. Then he saw him. The smile didn't just fade. It fell off his face like a picture frame dropping from a wall. He gasped. He actually took a step back, knocking into a bolt of tweed. "We are closed," the tailor whispered. It was 2 in the afternoon. "The door was open," our man said. His voice had changed by then. It wasn't the whisper of the scared boy under the floorboards. It was the voice of the stage beast, deep, practiced, booming. "I require a suit, velvet, black, the kind a banker wears when he buries his rivals." We cannot serve you," the tailor stammered. "The clientele, if they saw you..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The meaning was clear. "You will frighten the money away." Our man didn't get angry. He didn't roar. He just reached into his pocket. He pulled out a roll of banknotes, thick, crisp notes. He placed them on the counter. "I will pay double," he said. The tailor looked at the money. Greed is a powerful thing, my friends. It is stronger than fear. It is stronger than disgust. The tailor swallowed hard. He picked up his tape measure, but he held it with just 2 fingers, like it was a dead rat. He didn't want to touch the customer. He measured the shoulders from a distance. He measured the chest without making contact. Every time the tape measure got close to the heavy, folded skin of the neck, the tailor's hand shook. "Triple," our man said, watching him in the mirror. "If you make the collar high enough to cover this," he tapped his jaw. "Triple," the tailor squeaked. When the suit was finished a week later, it was beautiful. Midnight blue velvet, silk lining, buttons made of mother of pearl. He put it on in front of the mirror in the shop. For a second, just a second, he looked like a prince. The high collar hid the worst of the swelling. The tailored shoulders made him look powerful, not deformed. He paid the man. He handed the cash directly to him. The tailor didn't take it from his hand. He pointed to the counter. "Leave it there." Then he picked up the money with a pair of metal tweezers and dropped it into a drawer, as if the cash itself was infected. Our man saw that. He saw the tweezers. He saw the way that the tailor wiped the counter with a rag afterward. But he walked out onto the street with his head high. Let them use tweezers, he thought. I am wearing velvet, but velvet doesn't stop the cold, and it certainly doesn't stop the loneliness. That was the next pit. You see, when you're famous and singular, that was the polite word. People want to be near you, but they don't want to know you. They want to be close to the fire, but they don't want to burn. He started living in hotels, grand hotels with crystal chandeliers and carpets so thick your boots sank into them. He rented the biggest suite. He ordered champagne he didn't like, just because it cost $10 a bottle, and the flies came. That's what I call them. The flies. Men with thin mustaches and slicked back hair who laughed too loud at his jokes. Women who wore too much rouge and looked at his wallet, not his face. They filled his room every night. Smoke hung in the air like a blue fog. Cards were slapped on the table. Dice rattled in cups. "You're a genius, sir," they would say. "A true marvel." They toasted him. To the king of the ring. To the living wonder. He sat in the middle of it all, drinking brandy to numb the feeling in his gut. He knew they were lying. He wasn't stupid. He had taught himself to read from scraps of paper. He could read people just as well. He knew they saw a monster. But for a few hours while the wine was pouring, they pretended he was a man. And he was so desperate to be a man that he paid for the privilege. Morlock, the circus owner, tried to warn him. Morlock was a cruel man, a user, but he protected his investment. "You are bleeding money," Morlock told him one night, standing in the doorway of the hotel suite. "These people are vultures. They will pick your bones clean. They are my friends," our man said, slurring his words. "They respect me." "They respect the zero on your bank note," Morlock sneered. "Close your purse and see how many stay for breakfast." "Get out," our man said. "You only want to keep me in a cage. Here, I am free." Free. That was the funniest joke of all. There was a man at the table that night. Let's call him the Count. He wasn't a count, of course. He was a grifter from Chicago with a fake accent. He put an arm around our man's velvet shoulders. "My dear friend," the Count said, "you have conquered the stage. Now you must conquer the market. Why let the banks keep your gold? I have an opportunity, a shipping line, rubber from the Amazon, guaranteed triple returns in 6 months." It sounded like magic. It sounded like the way out. Our man thought If I am rich enough, truly rich, I won't have to show my face in the ring ever again. I can buy an island. I can build a castle with high walls. Where do I sign? He asked. Right here. The Count smiled, pushing a paper across the stained tablecloth. He signed. He wrote a check for everything he had saved in 5 years of humiliation. Everything the beast had earned. The next morning was quiet. There is a specific kind of silence that comes after a disaster. It is heavy. It rings in your ears. He woke up in the armchair. The sun was streaming through the window, harsh and bright. The bottles were empty. The ashtrays were overflowing. "Count," he called out. Silence. "Clara?" That was the name of the dancer he thought liked him. Silence. He stood up, his head pounding. He walked to the bedroom. Empty. The drawers were open. His gold pocket watch, gone. The silver grooming set, gone. Even the silk scarf he wore to hide his neck, gone. On the pillow where he had hoped to find a note of affection, there was a playing card, the Joker. And scrawled across it in pencil were 3 words. "Thanks for the show." He ran to the bank. I can picture him running down the hotel corridor, his shirt unbuttoned, the panic rising in his throat like bile. The bank manager met him with a sad shake of the head. "The check was cashed yesterday afternoon, sir. The account is closed. But the investment, the rubber company, there is no company, sir. Gone, all of it." The wall of money had collapsed and he was standing naked in the ruins. He walked back to the hotel, but they wouldn't let him in. He hadn't paid the bill for the suite. His trunk was on the sidewalk. The beautiful velvet suit was dusty. He sat on his trunk. People walked by. They stared. Without his money, without the lighting of the stage, without the mystery, he was just a freak on a street corner again. A frightening thing, a mistake. And then the carriage pulled up. Black paint, gold lettering, Morlock's Traveling Museum. The door opened. Morlock didn't get out. He just leaned forward from the shadows of the carriage interior, smoking that same cigar. "I told you," Morlock said. He didn't sound angry. He sounded satisfied, like a man who just won a bet. "I have nothing," our man whispered. "No," Morlock corrected. "You have debt. The hotel bill, I paid it. The tailor, you still owed him a final installment. I paid that too. The gambling debts you signed markers for last night, bought them all." He held up a sheaf of papers. "I own your debt, my boy. And now we need to renegotiate your contract." "I will work," the man said. "I will go back to the ring. I will wear the muzzle." "Oh no," Morlock smiled. The smoke curled around his teeth. "The muzzle is old news. You are getting older. Your joints are stiffening. The crowd is bored. We need a new arrangement, a permanent one." Morlock stepped out of the carriage. He walked over to where the man sat and handed him a document. It was thick, parchment paper, heavy as a tombstone. "Read Clause 4, Morlock said. The man looked down. The letters swam before his eyes, but he forced them to focus. Clause 4. Upon the cessation of vital functions, death, the physical remains, body of the performer shall remain the sole and exclusive property of the Morlock Museum. The proprietor reserves the right to preserve, stuff, mount, or skeletonize said remains for public display in perpetuity. The air left his lungs. He felt cold, colder than he had ever felt in the snow. You want to stuff me?" he whispered. "You are a masterpiece of nature," Morlock said softly. "Why should the worms get you? You're valuable, dead or alive. In fact, maybe more valuable dead. No feeding costs, No complaints. No suits of velvet. I won't sign that. Then you go to debtor's prison. Morlock shrugged. And in prison, with a face like that, well, the guards are not kind. And the other prisoners, they will tear you apart before supper. At least with me, you're a star. Even after you die, you will be a star behind glass. He looked at the contract. Then he looked at the prison wagons rolling down the street a few blocks away. Morlock had him. It was a trap with no exit. He took the pen. His hand was steady. Now, cold and steady, he signed. Morlock blotted the signature. Good. We leave for the coast tonight. New tour, and stop wearing the velvet. It confuses the customers. They traveled to the port city. It was a place of fog and ship horns. The circus set up near the docks, where the smell of salt water mixed with the smell of rotting fish. But something had changed in our man. The life contract didn't break him. It sharpened him. He sat in his wagon at night, looking at the kerosene lamp. He watched the flame dance behind the glass. He realized something. Morlock owned his life. Morlock owned his death. As long as he was the architect of nightmares, he was property. There was only one way to break the contract. The contract was for a specific man, a specific name, a specific monster. If that monster ceased to exist, the contract was void. Die to live, he whispered to himself. It was a Tuesday. I remember the date because the newspaper clipping is right here. November 18th. A windy night. The show was over. The camp was sleeping. The guard was drunk near the fire. Our man took a bottle of high-proof alcohol, spirits used for the Fire Breathers Act. He poured it over the floor of his wagon. He soaked his velvet suit, the one he wasn't allowed to wear anymore. He placed his famous brass muzzle on the bed, right in the center, like a skull on a pillow. He opened the back window. The fog outside was thick, a perfect gray blanket. He struck a match. It wasn't a big flame at first, just a little blue tongue licking the wood. But old wagons are dry. They are made of pine and varnish. The fire caught. It roared. He slipped out the window. He didn't run. Running attracts attention. He crawled. He crawled under the wagons, through the mud, just like he used to crawl under the floorboards of his father's house. Behind him, a shout went up. Fire! Fire in the beast's wagon! He heard the crackle of timber. He heard the smash of glass. He heard Morlock screaming, not for him, but for the asset. Save the body! Get the body out! Our man didn't look back. He reached the edge of the docks. The water was black and churning. A ship was loading cargo, crates of wool bound for England, or maybe timber bound for the north. It didn't matter. It was leaving. He found a pile of old sacking, rough burlap, used to wrap cargo. He pulled a piece off and wrapped it around his head, covering his face completely, leaving only a slit for his eyes. He stripped off his fine circus shirt and put on a discarded laborer's tunic he found on a barrel. He wasn't the architect of nightmares anymore. He wasn't the beast. He was just a shape in the fog. He walked up the gangplank, carrying a crate like he belonged there. His heart was beating so hard, he thought it would crack his ribs, but he kept his head down. The foreman didn't look at his face. He only looked at his hands. Heavy load, the foreman yelled. Stow it deep. He went down into the dark belly of the ship. The smell of tar and bilge water hit him. It was the smell of freedom. Up on the dock, the fire was raging. The wagon was a torch. Everyone was watching the flames. Everyone was mourning the monster. And in the cargo hold, a man who didn't exist anymore sat on a crate, listening to the ship's whistle blow, a long, mournful sound. Ooh! He touched his face beneath the burlap. It was still there, the heavy brow, the twisted nose. But for the first time in 10 years, it wasn't a ticket sales hook. It was just a face. He had no money. He had no name. He was officially dead. But as the ship lurched away from the pier, he felt something he hadn't felt since he was a child holding a scrap of alphabet paper. He felt a future. But friends, you know the trouble with the past. You can burn a wagon. You can fake a death. You can cross an ocean. But a contract written in ink and greed, that is a ghost that walks. And Morlock was not the kind of man who let his ghosts wander. He would find out, not today, not tomorrow, but the reckoning was coming. As sure as the tide comes back to the shore. And our man, he was about to learn that starting from zero is hard, but starting from below zero, starting from the grave, that takes more than just courage. It takes a different kind of genius. The ship turned into the open sea. The lights of the circus faded. The architect was ash. Now the invisible man had to survive. When a man dies, he expects silence. He expects a white light or maybe a fire if he's been wicked. But our man didn't get silence. He got the scream of seagulls and the rattle of iron chains. He walked off that ship into a city of fog. I don't recall the name of the place. It might have been Liverpool or perhaps New York or just a place where the rain never stopped. It was gray. The cobblestones were slick with oil. The buildings leaned over the street like old drunks. He was nobody here. And let me tell you, friends, being nobody is the greatest luxury in the world. He wore a scarf wrapped 3 times around his neck and chin. He wore a cap pulled down low over his brow. To the men on the docks, he was just Scarves, or the quiet one, or Hey You. He found work that first morning. They were unloading crates of salted fish. Heavy work. The kind of work that breaks your back before noon. But he was strong. You remember he had spent years holding up the sky in the circus ring. He had muscles like twisted ropes under that rough shirt. He carried 2 crates when other men carried one. He didn't complain about the smell. He didn't stop to smoke. He worked like a machine. At the end of the day, the foreman tossed a few coins at him. Copper. Just pennies. Dirty, greasy pennies that smelled of fish guts. He looked at them in his palm. They weren't silver. They weren't thrown by a cheering crowd. He had earned them with his sweat, not his. Shame. He closed his hand over them and felt a strange thing happening in his chest. It was pride. A small, cold, hard pride. For 6 months he lived like a ghost. He rented a room no bigger than a closet in a boarding house near the water. He ate bread and onions. He didn't speak to anyone. If someone asked him a question, he grunted or pointed. He was terrified that if he spoke, the deep, booming voice of the stage beast would slip out and the illusion would shatter. But you cannot hide a sharp mind under a flat cap forever. Intelligence is like water. It finds a crack and it leaks out. He got a job at a warehouse. It was a chaotic place, a storm of merchandise, barrels of molasses from the islands, bales of cotton from the south, boxes of tea from the east. It was piled up to the ceiling in a mess that made no sense. Rats chewed on the silk. Water leaked onto the sugar. The owner of this place was a man named Mr. Sterling. Sterling was a good man, but disorganized. He was losing money because he didn't know what he had. He would shout at his clerks, "Where's the indigo? Where's the spices?" And the clerks would just shrug. Our man, the ghost in the scarf, watched this chaos. He couldn't help himself. You have to understand, the circus is strict. You have to pack a wagon perfectly. Poles on the bottom, canvas on top, or you can't move to the next town. Every inch matters. So, on his lunch break, when the other men were drinking ale, our man started to move the crates. He didn't ask permission. He just did it. He put the heavy items near the door. He put the dry goods up high, away from the damp floor. He grouped the shipments by destination, not by arrival. It was a small thing. But to a business, order is everything. One afternoon, Mr. Sterling walked into the warehouse floor. He stopped. He dropped his cane. "Who did this?" Sterling asked. "Who arranged the tea chest by region?" The other workers stayed silent. They thought someone was in trouble. Our man stepped forward from the shadows. He kept his head down. "I did, sir. The damp was getting to the salon. It needed to move." Sterling looked at him. He saw a big man in dirty clothes, face half hidden, but he didn't see a laborer. He saw a solution. "Can you read?" Sterling asked. "Yes, sir." "Can you write?" "Yes, sir." "Come to the office." That was the moment the door opened. Not a trap door this time, a real door. He sat at a desk in the back of the counting house. He still wore his scarf. He told them he had a burn scar from a fire. It was half true, wasn't it? He had burned his past. People in offices are polite. They didn't pry. They looked at his ledger, not his chin. And oh, his ledger was beautiful. His handwriting was precise, elegant, sharp. The handwriting of a man who learned letters by tracing them with his finger on holy books. He balanced the accounts. He found the leaks. He stopped the waste. Within a year, the Sterling Trading Company was making double the profit. Mr. Sterling treated him like a son, but our man kept his distance. He knew the rule. Get too close and the mask slips. He worked late at night, alone by the light of a single green lamp. He was the phantom of the ledger. But fate has a sense of humor. Mr. Sterling had a daughter. Her name was Eleanor. She wasn't the kind of girl they put on postcards. She had a sharp nose and sharper eyes. She wore glasses, which was rare for a woman then. She helped her father with the correspondence. She started coming to the office in the evenings. "You work too hard, Mr. Freeman," she said one night. He had taken the name Freeman, a simple name, a hopeful name. "The work is quiet," he said, not looking up from his ink. "The work is lonely," she corrected. She sat down on the other side of the desk. She had brought a book, poetry. Shelley or Byron, I think. "Do you like poetry, Mr. Freeman?" He froze. His heart did that old stutter step it used to do before the curtain rose. "I've read some," he said. "Then read to me." "My voice, it is not for reading soft things." "I think your voice is like a cello," she said, deep and sad. They began a courtship that happened entirely in the shadows. He never showed her his face in full light. He sat with his back to the lamp. He wore high collars. But they talked. For hours, while the rain lashed against the windows, they talked about the world, about history, about the stars. She fell in love with his mind. She fell in love with the way he thought. She fell in love with the man who had built himself out of nothing. But he knew it had to end. He couldn't marry her. It would be a crime. He was a monster. She was a lady. If she saw him, really saw him, she would run. One rainy Tuesday in November, always November, he decided to leave. He packed his bag. He was going to disappear again, run to another city, start over. She found him in the office, closing his ledger for the last time. "You are leaving," she said. It wasn't a question. "I must." "Because you think I am afraid?" "Because I am afraid," he said. "Eleanor, you do not know me. You know a voice. You know a shadow. If I turn around, if I take off this scarf, you will see something that God made when he was angry." "Turn around," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "I cannot." "Turn around, John." That was the name he used, John Freeman. He gripped the edge of the desk. The wood creaked. This was harder than the circus. This was harder than the fire. Slowly, agonizingly, he turned. He reached up and unwound the scarf. He tilted his face into the gaslight. He closed his eyes. He waited for the scream. He waited for the sound of retching. He waited for the door to slam. Silence. Then a touch. A hand. Soft, warm, dry. It touched the heavy ridge of his brow. It traced the twisted line of his nose. It rested on the swollen cheek that had made children cry in 3 continents. He opened his eyes. She wasn't looking away. She was looking right at him. Her eyes were wet, yes, but not with horror. "It is just flesh," she whispered. "It is just a container. It is a little broken, yes, but the contents are whole." He fell to his knees. He buried his face in her skirt, and he wept. He wept for the boy under the floorboards. He wept for the beast in the cage. He wept for the years of silence, and she held him. She smoothed his hair. "Hush," she said, but not the way his mother said it. She said it like a promise. "Hush, you're home." They were married quietly. The gossip in town was cruel, of course. Why did she marry the scarred man? Does she do it for the money? But they didn't care. They built a fortress. 10 years passed. 10 good years. Sterling passed away, and our man, John Freeman, took over the company. He changed the sign on the door. Freeman and Sterling Global. He became wealthy, truly wealthy. Not the flashy, desperate wealth of the hotel suite, but the solid oak root wealth of industry. He owned ships. He owned warehouses. He built a house on the hill, surrounded by a high brick wall. Inside that wall, he was happy. He walked in his garden without a scarf. His children, he had 2, a boy and a girl, climbed on his knees. They didn't see a monster. They pulled his big ears and laughed. To them, he was just Papa. He thought he was safe. He thought the ocean of time had washed away the footprints of the beast. But the past is a hunter. It tracks you by your scent. It was 1855, a crisp autumn day. The leaves were turning gold. John Freeman was sitting in his private office at the top of the warehouse building. He was reviewing contracts for a shipment of silk from China. There was a knock at the door. "Enter," he said. His voice was authoritative now, the voice of a chairman. His clerk opened the door. "Sir, there is a man to see you. He says he has an old business acquaintance. He insists." "Does he have a card?" "No card, sir. He looks down on his luck. But he says he knew you in the West." A cold wind seemed to blow through the room, even though the windows were shut. "Send him in," Freeman said. The door opened again. A man walked in. He was old now. His coat was threadbare, green with age. His boots were scuffed. The silk top hat was crushed and stained. He walked with a limp, leaning on a cheap cane. It was Dr. Sylvanus Morlock, the ringmaster. He looked small. The grand, terrifying figure of the boy's childhood had shrunk into a bitter, broken old man. The circus must have failed. The years had not been kind to him. Freeman didn't move. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk. He knew his face was exposed. He made no move to cover it. Morlock hobbled closer. He squinted his watery eyes. He looked at the painting on the wall. He looked at the silk curtains. He looked at the man in the fine gray suit. Then he smiled, and his teeth were yellow like old ivory. "I knew it," Morlock rasped. His voice sounded like dry leaves sliding on pavement. "I saw the portrait in the Business Gazette. They sketched you from the side, but I knew that jaw. I built that jaw, didn't I?" "You have the wrong building," Freeman said. "My name is John Freeman." "John Freeman," Morlock chuckled. He pulled out a dirty handkerchief and wiped his mouth. "A nice name, dull, but nice. Much better than the Architect of Nightmares." "State your business or leave," Freeman said. His hand moved toward the bell on his desk to summon the police. "My business?" Morlock laughed. He sat down in a leather chair without being asked. "My business is ownership, John, or whatever you call yourself. Property rights. I am not your property. The beast is dead. He died in a fire 10 years ago." "The beast is dead, yes," Morlock said. He reached into his dirty coat pocket. He pulled out a folded, burnt-edged piece of paper. "But the contract..." "The contract survived the fire. I keep my papers in a metal box, you see. I am sentimental that way." Freeman stared at the paper. He could see his father's clumsy X on it. He could see the bold signature of Morlock. "You signed a life contract," Morlock whispered. "Clause 4. Do you remember Clause 4? "I am a citizen of this city," Freeman said. "I am a husband, a father. I own half the waterfront. You cannot touch me." Morlock leaned forward. The smell of stale tobacco and desperation filled the clean air of the office. "You are rich," Morlock said, "and rich men have secrets. What would your board of directors say if they knew their chairman used to eat raw chickens for a nickel? What would your wife's society friends say if they saw the posters I still have in my trunk? Half man, half devil." "They know my face," Freeman said. "They have accepted it." "They accept the unfortunate merchant," Morlock hissed. "They will not accept the circus freak. I will put your pictures on every wall in this town. I will tell the newspapers. I will turn your high society life back into a sideshow. Your children will be mocked in the street. Your wife will be laughed out of church." It was a valid threat. Society was cruel. Respectability was fragile. If the connection was made, if the respected Mr. Freeman was revealed to be the famous beast of the sawdust ring, the scandal would destroy his credit, his social standing, his family's peace. Freeman felt the old cage closing around him, the invisible bars. "What do you want?" Freeman asked. Morlock smiled. "I want back pay, 10 years of lost revenue, and I want to restart the show. I'm building a new museum, John, a grand one, and I need my star. I am not going back to the cage." "Oh, you won't be in a cage," Morlock said softly. "You can live in your house, but every Tuesday and Thursday you will come to my theater. You will wear the muzzle. You will roar. You will be mine again." "And if I refuse, then I invoke the contract," Morlock said. He tapped the paper. "Legally, you owe me your services, or your value in cash. But I don't want cash. I want the asset. I want the legend." Freeman looked at the old man. He saw the malice. He saw the envy. Morlock hated him. He hated him because the monster had succeeded where the master had failed. "You are forgetting one thing, Morlock," Freeman said quietly. "And what is that?" I am not the boy who hid under the floorboards anymore. Freeman stood up. He walked to the window and looked out at his ships in the harbor. He had built this. He had built it with discipline, with logic, with cold, hard work. You think you have leverage? Freeman said, turning back. You think you can shame me? But you are making a mistake. The only mistake was leaving you unchained, Morlock sneered. I'll give you 24 hours. Tomorrow at noon, I expect you at the Grand Hotel. Bring your checkbook, or bring your costume. Your choice. Morlock stood up, smoothed his greasy coat, and limped toward the door. He paused with his hand on the knob. It's good to see you, boy, Morlock said. You haven't changed a bit, still ugly as sin. He left. Freeman stood alone in the silence. He looked at the spot where Morlock had sat. He felt sick. The old fear was scratching at his throat. He looked at the bell on his desk. He could call the police. He could hire thugs to break Morlock's legs. He could pay the money. But that was what the old John would have done. That was what the victim would have done. John Freeman looked at his reflection in the glass of the window. He touched the scar on his soul. No, he whispered. He wasn't going to hide. He wasn't going to pay. He sat down and pulled a sheet of fresh, expensive paper toward him. He dipped his pen in the ink. I will not buy my silence, he wrote. I will own my noise. He rang the bell. The clerk entered. Yes, sir. Clear my schedule for tomorrow morning, Freeman said. His voice was steady. It was iron. And send a message to the board of directors and my wife. Ask them to meet me here at noon. Is everything all right, sir? Everything is perfect, Freeman said. I am finally going to finish the show. He wasn't going to let Morlock expose him. He was going to expose himself. But friends, playing the last card is dangerous. If you miss, you lose everything. You lose the house, the name, the love. John Freeman was betting his entire life on one moment of honesty. And as he sat there, watching the sun go down over the water, he wondered if the world was finally ready to look at a monster and see a man, or if the stones were waiting in their hands, just like before. Tomorrow would be the end, or the beginning. Noon is a hard time for secrets. At midnight, shadows have power. At dawn, there is hope, but noon is merciless. The sun hangs straight overhead, and it leaves no place for a ghost to hide. The boardroom of Freeman and Sterling Global was a place of mahogany and silence. You could hear the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light. 12 men sat around the long table. These were men who owned railroads, men who owned coal mines, men who didn't smile unless they were signing a deed. They wore gray frock coats and stiff collars. They smelled of bay rum and serious money. At the head of the table stood John Freeman. He didn't sit. He stood like a captain on the bridge of a ship in a storm. He wore his fine suit, but he had left his cravat loose. His neck, the thick scarred neck of the beast, was visible. To his right sat Eleanor. She was pale. Her hands were folded on her lap, knuckles white, but she looked straight ahead. She was the anchor. If the ship went down, she was going down with it. At 12 o'clock precisely, the heavy oak doors swung open. The clerk looked nervous. Mr. Morlock to see you, sir. Morlock didn't wait to be invited. He strode in. He had polished his boots. He had brushed his green coat. He had put a flower in his buttonhole. He thought he was walking into a coronation. He thought he was coming to collect a kingdom. He stopped at the foot of the table. He looked at the 12 rich men. He looked at John Freeman. He smiled that yellow ivory smile. "Gentlemen," Morlock said. He bowed low, a theatrical circus bow. "I apologize for the intrusion. I am here to discuss a matter of legacy, a matter of lost property." The board members shifted in their chairs. One of them, a banker named Thornton, adjusted his spectacles. "We are in the middle of a quarterly review, sir. Who are you?" "I am a creator," Morlock said. "I am a man who finds diamonds in the rough, and I have come to reclaim my greatest discovery." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the poster, the one with the red letters, "The Architect of Nightmares." He unfolded it. It crinkled loudly in the quiet room. He held it up next to his own face, then pointed a crooked finger at John Freeman. "Look closely, gentlemen," Morlock whispered. "Look at your chairman. Look at the nose. Look at the jaw. Do you see the resemblance? Or has the fine wool blinded you?" The room went cold. The men looked at the poster. They looked at Freeman. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with a knife. "This man," Morlock continued, his voice rising, gaining the old ringmaster's cadence, "is a fraud. He is a runaway. He is a creature I bought for $50 in a mud hut 30 years ago. He belongs in a cage, not a counting house. He is a monster." Eleanor started to stand up, but Freeman put a hand on her shoulder. Gentle, firm. He didn't look at Morlock. He looked at his partners. He didn't shout. He didn't deny it. "He is right," John Freeman said. Morlock blinked. He hadn't expected that. He expected a fight. He expected begging. "He is right," Freeman said again. His voice was deep, filling the corners of the room. "I was bought for $50. My father sold me because he couldn't stand the sight of me. Mr. Morlock put me in a cage. He put a muzzle on my face. He told me I was a beast, and I believed him." Freeman walked down the length of the table. He walked slowly. He stopped in front of Morlock. He towered over the little showman. "But Mr. Morlock made a mistake," Freeman said to the board. "He thought the beast was the skin. He thought the monster was the bone. He didn't know that inside the cage, I was listening. Inside the cage, I was counting. Inside the cage, I was learning how to make a crowd look where I wanted them to look." He turned to Thornton, the banker. "Mr. Thornton, you invest with me because I see risk where others see safety, and safety where others see risk. Where do you think I learned that? I learned it looking through the bars of a wagon." He turned to the shipping magnate on his left. "Sir, you trust me with your cargo because I know the value of a single crate. Where do you think I learned that? I learned it when my whole life was packed into a box." He looked back at Morlock. "Yes, I was the architect of nightmares," Freeman said. "I was the sensation. I made this man rich, and then he lost it all because he's a fool who thinks he owns people. I built this company from nothing. I built it with my own hands, my own mind, and my own name. The face you see, it is the same face, but the man behind it, the man is new." Morlock was trembling. "I have a contract," he screeched. He waved the yellowed paper. "Clause 4. I own you, dead or alive." Freeman reached out. He didn't snatch the paper. He took it gently from Morlock's shaking fingers. "A contract," Freeman said. He looked at it. "A contract for a monster." He held it up to the light. "But there are no monsters here," Freeman said softly. "Only men." He tore the paper in half. Rip! The sound was louder than a cannon shot. He put the halves together and tore them again. And again he turned the life contract into confetti. He let the pieces drift down to the floor like snow. "Mr. Thornton," Freeman said, not looking down at the mess, "does this man have an appointment?" Thornton cleared his throat. He looked at Morlock, who was staring at the paper scraps on the carpet, his mouth open, his power gone. Then Thornton looked at Freeman. He saw the scars. He saw the heavy brow. But he also saw the suit, the posture, the undeniable force of will. Thornton stood up. "I do not believe he does, Mr. Chairman," Thornton said. "In fact, I believe he is trespassing." Morlock looked around the table. He saw no horror. He saw no disgust. He saw only a wall of gray suits. He saw the unified front of commerce. These men didn't care about biology. They cared about success. And Freeman was a success. Morlock was a failure in a cheap coat. You are all freaks," Morlock spat. "You are protecting him." "Get out," Eleanor said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut like glass. Two of the younger board members stood up. They were big men. They walked toward Morlock. The old ringmaster shrank. He clutched his hat to his chest. He looked at Freeman one last time. "You will never be one of them," he hissed. "You're just a dog in a silk waistcoat." "Perhaps," Freeman said, "but it is my waistcoat, and it is my house. Goodbye, Sylvanus." Morlock turned and fled. The door closed behind him. Freeman stood there, breathing hard. The adrenaline was fading. He felt his knees shaking. He looked at his wife. She was smiling, tears running down her face. He looked at the board. "Now," Freeman said, smoothing his jacket, "about the shipment of silk from Shanghai. I believe the pricing is incorrect." And just like that, the meeting continued. They didn't mention the muzzle. They didn't mention the cage. They went back to business. Because in the end, dignity isn't something you are given. It is something you take. It is something you build brick by brick until nobody dares to knock it down. John Freeman lived for another 30 years. He didn't hide anymore. He walked the streets of his city with his head high. People still stared, yes. Human nature doesn't change that fast. Children still pointed. But he didn't cross the street to avoid them. He would stop, tip his hat and say, "Good morning." And because he wasn't afraid, they forgot to be afraid. He became a legend, but not the kind Morlock wanted. He was the quiet giant of the port. I remember seeing him in the garden a few weeks before he died. It was 1889. The late summer light was golden, thick with dust and pollen. He was sitting in a wicker chair, a blanket over his legs. He was very old then. His face, that face that had been a curse, a paycheck, a prison, and finally a badge of honor, was soft now. Time treats all rocks the same. It wears them down to something smooth. His grandchildren were playing on the grass. A little girl, no older than 5, ran up to him holding a flower, a dandelion. "For you, Grandpapa," she said. He took it in his big, rough hand. He smiled. It was a twisted smile, sure, but it was real. "Tell me a story," the little girl said. "Tell me about the circus." He shook his head. "No," he said, "I won't tell you about the circus. The circus is a lie. I will tell you about the ship. I will tell you about the day I walked into the fog and became invisible." He wrote it all down. "This manuscript, this pile of papers I have been reading to you." He finished it the day he died. He put it in this envelope and sealed it with the red wax. I was there when he sealed it. I was his clerk then, young, eager. "Why write it, sir?" I asked him. "If you want to be forgotten?" He looked at me with those deep, dark eyes. I don't want to be forgotten, he said. I just want to be understood. People think triumph is a parade. They think it is noise and light. But triumph is quiet. Triumph is just waking up in a bed you own, looking at a face you accept, and realizing nobody holds the key to your life but you. He tapped the envelope. Keep this, he said. Wait 50 years. When the world is a little older, maybe a little wiser. Then tell them. Tell them about the architect. The architect of nightmares? I asked. No, he said. Just the architect. And now here we are. November 1891. Wait, 50 years? No, he told me 50, but I am old. I cannot wait that long. The wax is breaking now. The story is out. The fire is dying in the grate. The room is getting cold. But do you feel it? The heat of it? The heat of a life that refused to be an ash. He wasn't a magic trick. He wasn't a warning. He was a man who played a hand of cards with the devil, and he won. Not by cheating, but by refusing to fold. Look at the photograph in the file, the last one. See? He is standing by the window. He is not hiding his profile. He is looking at the horizon. Some people are born in the light. They think they own it. But men like John Freeman, they are born in the dark. They have to manufacture their own light, spark by spark, day by day. And let me tell you, that kind of light, it burns cleaner. It burns longer. So when you feel the cage closing in, whether it is a debt or a job or a flaw in your own skin that you cannot bear to look at, remember him. Remember the heavy face. Remember the muzzle. Remember the 2 pennies in the dust. And remember that the only contract that matters is the one you sign with yourself. I'll leave the lamp on for you. The file is closed. Good night.